I'll walk through and maybe point out a couple things over in LityxIQ with kind of the main new functionality being these manual data sets. So like I said in that description, they are essentially a third kind of data set, right? We have raw data sets, we have derived data sets. We're really a fourth kind, I guess. We also have internal data sets, which would be the ones that are created by LityxIQ on its own, right? Scoring catalogs and implementation catalogs, those kind of things. But the third kind of data set that a user can create. So it's a manual data set, and I have an example here which I think shows a decent reason for its purpose. So I'll actually do it in the process flow. And so in this example, there are two manual data sets leading into and created for the purpose of creating this derived data set, which has combinations of channels and months. So let me click on one of these here. So it's like a data set in pretty much every way other than how it's defined, right? So it has rows and columns, it has summary statistics, you can do insights from it, and all the other things more or less that you can do with other data sets other than execute them. And I'll show you, how that works. So when you work with and define a manual data set, the setup is sort of like raw data sets, but just slightly different with a little fewer options. And the first tab is a data entry tab instead of pointing to a file or a location kind of a tab. And so essentially, again, remember they're meant to be, smallish data sets that are kind of hand entered. And so the way you work with it is you have these buttons up here to add and remove columns. So you're sort of creating the data set from scratch. So if I want to add, a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth column, I click the button here and type in the name. And I won't do it just so I kind of keep this in place, but type in the name and another column will get added to the background here, and you can keep doing that for as many columns as you need. And then to enter data into it, you would just type in the data up here in the yellow row. So let's say I want to have TV as another channel. You would type that in, hit enter. You can also cut and paste from a spreadsheet into here. So if I have, small data in a spreadsheet that I don't want to have to type in, somebody's already typed in a spreadsheet, I can go cut it from the spreadsheet and paste it into the window here. So the purpose of this data set here is to have a listing of, let's say, channels that you might want to analyze or that you might need to run a model against or create a data set from. And then I have another data set back here, which are months. And the ultimate purpose is to have a data set that has all the combinations of months and channels. An example of where I've used something like that, but I've created it differently in the past, is in the display advertising optimization, where at the end, kind of the end piece of that optimization process is to have a data set that has, more or less like all combinations of the kinds of decisions you can make with the media, like the month and the day of the week and the creative that was used, and you want to have all the combinations in there and then score it up, against all those combinations. So there's a good reason for being able to, especially if the number of possibilities is kind of small to start with, then you would need to hand enter them. Is a good way to do that. Now it's meant to be as relatively simple as possible. So the default setting for the dictionary, so it has a dictionary just like any data set, right? So for all practical purposes, it is a data set. The default setting is to create it dynamically. All right, so the idea then is once you type the data in here, you should be able to just hit save and close, and everything else should be handled behind the scenes for you. But like with other data sets, you can come in here over here as well and create it from scratch, review it, and edit it and change it if you want to. But the main idea though is you kind of put the data in over here and hit save and close. So the one respect in how it's different from other data sets is when you hit save and close here, it actually, the best way to say it would be that it executes the data set right then. Right. So in other words, it takes the data you entered and puts it into a backend Redshift table, just like all other data sets are. Right. So there isn't really a need to execute it or run it separately. Just hitting save and close takes the data that you entered there and puts it into a data set. Okay. So once you do that, it's kind of ready to go now for browsing and summary statistics and anything else you might normally do with a data set, putting it into other data sets like this. Okay, this one down here, same idea, right? But just one column of months. And then, so the slight example here then is we wanted to create a downstream data set that had all the combinations of things. And so this is really just taking advantage of existing functionality. So if I have any two data sets like this and I do a join, but without a primary key, it just puts all the rows together into a result set and big cross join essentially. And so in this case, I didn't rerun that with the new TV channel I put in there, but before I put that in, this is what it looked like. So in any case, it doesn't have a role in all situations and projects for sure, but there are definitely some nuanced situations where it, I think, helps quite a bit. Another example of a good place that I see use for it is if you have, it's sort of related to configuration variables. So if you have a process that requires a certain number of configuration variables to be set before you start the process, like maybe a date and some kind of ID and maybe other aspects that are going to be parameters of that process. Typically you might come over here and enter them into the configuration variables and go through one by one, but possibly a way to do that now, depending on how complex or big the situation is, would be to create those in a configuration or in a manual data set. So you can sort of have a manual data set that has two columns, one for the configuration variable name and one for the configuration variable value. Just go in and edit the values. I guess just to make that clear here. All right, so I can change values if I want to too. So right, so you can edit data that's already there. And so can easily, edit the data, use this as a configuration variable data set. And then when I hit save and close, it will save the data and also enter those as configuration variables. So might be a slightly more convenient way to do it, especially if I have a bunch of configuration variables and don't want to, wade through the configuration variables tab there.